God, take our minds and think through them, take our lips and speak through them, take our hearts and set them on fire with love for you. Amen. Having Rowan here this week reminded me of a time way back when her mother, Jennifer, our first child, was about 2 years old. And I had just gone back to work and was at St. John's, the cathedral then church. That's where I started doing part-time director of Christian education work. And so we had put Jennifer in a daycare. And the daycare was at the Second Presbyterian Church in Knoxville. And that daycare had a parents group. And the parents group met monthly, and Jim and I went every month to the parents group along with several other of the parents. And each of those meetings had several components. We'd kind of do some business that had to do with money. You got to do that at all of those meetings, you know. And we'd look at things that needed to be addressed for the center. But there was also always a component that had to do with parenting. And the one that I have remembered and has been just really a formative thing in my mind in everything for years and years and years was a night when we were asked to write down and then share with the group what we would like for our children to remember about us with them when they grew up. When they grew up, what would we want them to remember about us? And so we all wrote things down. I can't remember exactly what it was. But there were things kind of like this that we wrote down and shared, that we'd like them to remember that we spent time with them. That we would like for them to remember that when they had something they needed to say, we stopped and we listened to them. That we would like for them to remember that we valued what they did. Things like that. And when you look at all those things, what they really were was that we wanted them to remember that as a family, we had lived together well. But then we were asked to write down and share what we were doing right now to create those memories. And there were some things, but they weren't nearly as many as we had hoped we were doing. And what we realized as we talked about it was that just in the day-to-day stuff of trying to get things done, the things that seem so important that you've got to get done, picking up the room, getting supper on the table in time, getting to work on time, getting places on time. Getting on time was a big thing that we were always trying to do, was get someplace on time. That in the midst of all that, there were a lot of times when what we did not only didn't help to build a memory, but it may have even interfered with building memories of living together well. And that's the message that really runs through these scriptures today. The message is that we often let other things interfere with our ability to live together well. And as we look at the four readings, we see basically three things that they're pointing out there. They're not all inclusive, obviously, but they pointed out kind of three things these readings did. And Psalm 49 hit sort of on all of them. Each of the other readings seem to focus on a certain one. But one of the things that sometimes gets in our way of living together well with other people is what we hear in the Gospel of Luke, of being so focused on amassing wealth. And that may not be wealth in money. It may be our focus on amassing wealth and having more time, having a wealth of time. Or our focus on more wealth in terms of having more power to be able to do something we want to do. Or more status to be able to be regarded in the way that we want to be regarded. It can be, wealth is a whole bunch of things. And the point in the gospel is that when our focus is on waiting to live life until we've got everything, all the wealth of whatever it is we think we need together, we're going to miss living life. Think about that parable. The man is doing well. He's got an abundance of crops. But he obviously is working and working and working to the exclusion of other things and building barns and amassing it. And his whole goal is to get all together so that finally, when he knows that he's safe enough and has everything he possibly can need, then he's going to start living life. And lo and behold, he accomplishes it. And then he dies that very night. He dies having spent his life working to get to a place where he could live life. and never getting a chance to live the life he had all along. And so the gospel speaks to us about how life is to be found in living well together. Not in getting to the point where we think we can, but just right wherever we are, beginning to live well together how we can. Then we move on to the reading from Ecclesiastes, is the one I want to go to next. And it's noting another thing that sometimes can interfere with our ability to live together well with other people. And that is our tendency to think of things in this life that are transient, that come and go, as if they should be permanent. Especially in terms of the things we achieve, things we work hard for and create and build. We have a tendency to think that if we've put our time and our energy into it, maybe even spent our lives doing it, it should last forever and never change. And the writer from Ecclesiastes talks about that and how it is vanity of vanities, or what that really means, a better translation, is emptiness of emptiness. In other words, you're not going to find anything there, and trying to make permanent things that were never intended to be permanent. And the things that are never intended to be permanent are everything that we build in this world. And God has created a world where things come and things go. The seasons move and change. The leaves have to fall off the trees in order for new life to come to the trees. The wave has to go back out to the ocean before it comes back into the shore. And what the writer of Ecclesiastes says is much of the suffering we create for ourselves is by the pain we feel when we try to hold on to things that were never meant to be held on to. I mean, what if we busily pasted all the leaves back on the tree so they never fell off, you know? Or what if we could capture the wave as it came in so it never had to go back out to the ocean again? It could be our wave forever and ever and ever. We built a box and we kept it in it and we enjoyed it, but it never went back out. And so the writer from Ecclesiastes says that's part of what gets us. And that what we create and build and achieve is good and right for the time we create it and build it and achieve it. It's not that it's bad, but that it lives its life. And that we create suffering for ourselves and for others, when instead of letting what is meant to pass on, trying to hold on to it. Because when we let go of those things that are meant to pass on, we open ourselves to the possibilities of what God has in store for us next. So that's the second thing that can interfere with our ability to live together well, is trying to just hold on and make others hold on to something that we need to let go of. When we look at Paul's letter to the Colossians, we got to remember we're in the middle of somebody's letter. You ever written a letter? We don't do that anymore, but you ever written a long email? What if somebody just took the middle out of the email and read it? You'd get something, you might not get the whole thing. But in this whole context, Paul's talking to the Colossians about how they can live well together as people who are trying to follow Jesus in community. And in today's section, he focuses on paying attention to those things that come out of our mouths that are hurtful and harmful to people. He specifically talks about things that come out of malice and things that are slanderous and things that are verbally abusive. And if you look at that, what you see is that when those things come out of us, it's usually because we're focused on trying to win our position. I mean, we don't usually set out to hurt somebody, but if we are angry enough, if somebody has just absolutely made us furious and we're not thinking, words come out of our mouth, and we know if they're close to us, we know where their buttons are, and man, we'll hit every single one of those buttons until we just reduce them to nothing and win an argument. My friends, that's the sin of malice. He talks about slander. And, you know, there are times when we don't like somebody or we don't like a situation. And we may even be justified in that. But we hear somebody tell us something about that person or about that situation. They've got a story about why that situation exists the way it does. Or they've got things to say about that person, labels to put on them. And we hear that. And because we kind of agree that we don't like that situation, we simply take that story or that label at face value value, we never bother to check it out. It's just, wow, that's a good one. And so we repeat it. And then somebody who trusts us hears it, and then everybody's repeating a story or a label that may not be true. But we've helped it become perceived as true because we've passed it on. My friends, that's the sin of slander. Or verbal abuse. Now, we kind of know that if you intentionally say something derogatory to somebody, something that's meant to shame them, we kind of know that. Most of us don't do that. But there's another kind of verbal abuse that we don't always even think about as abuse. And it comes under the heading of teasing. We say something, it kind of hurts somebody, but, oh, I'm just teasing. I'm just teasing. So they can't even feel what we just said because we were just teasing. And they'd be pretty stupid if they felt bad about something we were just teasing about. And yet we can create great shame with some of our teasing. I have a sister who is absolutely brilliant. She's the fourth in the line of 5. And it was obvious she was absolutely brilliant even when she was a little girl. She could intellectually do things that we older sisters couldn't even do. But she didn't always have the same kind of common sense that we had because her mind just worked in a different way. That's what made her brilliant. It was a great gift. But my dad, and I don't think he meant this to hurt her, my dad thought it was funny in front of her to other people and with his friends to say, you know, Marilyn can analyze the components of rain, but she doesn't know when to get in out of it. And everybody would laugh and think how clever he was. And we even thought how clever he was, and we would repeat that. And it was after Marilyn was grown before we found how she felt about it, that it shamed her every time. That already she felt different from everybody, and she was sensitive about that. And we had helped turn what was an incredible God-given gift to her into something she felt shame about. We didn't mean to. But with our teasing, we verbally abused her. And so Paul calls us to catch ourselves when we do that. Because we all do it, when we don't mean to sometimes, but we all do it. To catch ourselves in doing it. And he says, instead of focusing on these things, and this could go for all those things I said, instead of focusing on what you have to do what you want to do, or instead of focusing on what you've achieved to the exclusion of what might come next, Paul says, focus on the things that are above where Christ is. But the problem is we sometimes forget about that part where Christ is, and when we think about focusing on things from above, we think about religious doctrine or dogma, social doctrine or dogma, political doctrine or dogma, and that's what we think focusing above is about. And then we use it to excuse all those behaviors that I just mentioned. There was a cartoon I saw one time. It showed 2 doors. One door had a sign on it that said, right religion. And the other door had a sign on it that said, wrong religion. Now, in front of the door saying right religion was a long line of people. They all looked very different, and obviously were carrying symbols from different religions, but they were all in front of the door labeled right religion, and it went on forever. And then in front of the door that was labeled wrong religion, how many people do you think were there? None. Bingo. There was nobody in front of the door that said wrong religion. Now, what the people lined up couldn't see, but what we, the viewers, could see was that behind those doors was just one space. It was all the same space. Both doors entered exactly the same space. And over to the side were 2 angels. And one angel said to the other, it's amazing, isn't it, how they still don't get the joke. And that's because it's a hard joke to get. It's a hard joke to think that God has one place for all of us. It's a hard joke to get that that place is not just some place in the future, but it's some place we're intended to start living into now. It's a hard joke to get that living into it now has something to do with not waiting to amass whatever you think you've got to amass before you live that way. It's a hard joke to get that in that place, the things we work our lives for, live a life, and it's time for them to go and let something else arise. It's a hard joke to get that the most important thing isn't winning the position we think is the most important to win. Those are hard jokes to get. But even if we can't get the joke, we can begin to act as if we do. Even if we don't understand it, we can begin to act as if we do. And we can catch ourselves when our thoughts are taking us to a place where we think we can't begin to live this way until we have gotten to this point or that point or that point. We can catch ourselves and we can stop. And let ourselves begin to live with what we have. And when our thoughts are beginning to take us to a place of, I've got to hold on to this, I cannot let this go away, we can catch ourselves and we can stop. And we can begin to see what it's time to let go of in this world and open ourselves to what's time to rise up. And when we find ourselves demonizing anybody, slandering anybody, or emotionally abusing anybody, even under the guise of just teasing, we can catch ourselves and we can stop. And we'll have to catch ourselves because we are not going to do this without doing that. We can catch ourselves though. We can ask God to help us catch ourselves. And when we catch ourselves thinking that way or doing those things, we can stop. Because the fullness of life, Jesus says in the Gospel of Luke, the fullness of life does not consist in our possessions. Our possessions of what we need to do before we do anything, our possessions of what we've achieved, our possessions of the winning positions we think we need to win. Fullness of life consists of none of those things. Fullness of life consists of this: living together well.